Hi, everyone. Welcome to Making the Grade. I'm Michelle Edmonds from Idaho News 6. So nice to have you with us on this Tuesday morning. Kevin Richard from Idaho Education News joining me once again to talk about all kinds of topics. And we're going to get to the legislature. But Kevin, we have to start with the fact that children in Rigby are headed back to school after a couple of days off after the school shooting that happened there. I think anybody out there, and we would welcome your comments and thoughts, but this is something that Idaho has hoped and prayed would never happen here. And now that it has, the community is still obviously shaken. And although this is not happening right here in the Treasure Valley, where we mostly cover, it is a topic that became important statewide, correct?
Well, first of all, I mean, we've both spent time in Eastern Idaho. We've both worked there, so we know a little bit about Rigby. Rigby is it's a close-knit community. It's not a very large city. It's probably growing over the past few years as that area around Bonneville County and Idaho Falls has grown. But it's a close-knit community. It's one of those it can't happen here kind of communities. You wouldn't expect something like this in a community like Rigby, but as we've seen with school shootings across the country, these things happen in communities where it's not supposed to happen. And that's what the folks in Rigby are having to come to grips with as kids go back to school today.
What can they expect at school today? You've been reporting that there'll be an increased police presence, as you would probably figure, also an increase in counselors. And it sounds like the surrounding communities and school districts are really rallying around the Rigby students.
Exactly, as you would expect. I mean, this is a pretty close-knit community, not just Rigby, but that whole area in Eastern Idaho. A lot of close-knit communities, a lot of families who know each other from community to community. So not surprising that you would see the other school districts coming to the assistance of Rigby. But yeah, as you mentioned, more of a police presence, but also more of a counseling presence.
Kevin, I'm asking you, as I often do, to look into a crystal ball, but how does a school shooting like this, which we should mention, there were 2 students who were shot, thankfully not critically,
Right.
and a custodian who was also shot, again, not critically, and a teacher who is now being considered a hero for wrestling away a gun from what police are describing as a 6th grade girl who was the shooter in this incident. How does this change the dynamic? And maybe we start the discussion with the guns in schools bills that have been going through the legislature just over the last couple of months. How does what happened in Rigby with this school shooting change what moves forward in policy for education?
In the short term, Michelle, I don't think it changes much of anything simply by nature of where we are in this legislative session. We've got a session that's on recess, lawmakers returning on Wednesday. It's unclear how much or how little this legislature is going to take on in the remaining time that they're in Boise. I had a chance to talk to Patty Ann Lodge. She is the chair of the Senate State Affairs Committee, very powerful committee, and that's where the 2 competing guns in schools bills have been assigned. And she told me on Friday, we're done for the session. We are not going to have more committee meetings. We're not going to move any more bills. So short answer, nothing's going to change this legislative session. And I would say longer term, looking down the road to what happens with this debate, because we know the debate will return in 2022, you have several groups that are at loggerheads about what to do about school safety and what to do about guns in schools. You have lawmakers like Chad Christensen. He is the one who's been pushing this bill to allow school employees to carry as long as they have an advanced and enhanced concealed weapons permit. For Representative Christensen and his allies, this is a Second Amendment issue. And his belief is that the Second Amendment should not end at the schoolhouse steps. That's a pretty hard line in the sand here. Senator Lodge talks about how she has heard from thousands of parents who simply don't want to see more guns in the schools. Full stop. So you have those positions that people are not going to move off of. Factor in, you have interest groups that have very different opinions about how to proceed. You have law enforcement groups that would prefer to see more of a movement towards school resource officers, towards SROs, which we already have in a lot of schools. You have education groups who really want this decision to remain a local decision. They really want school boards and school administrators to be able to have some control over who is carrying weapons in school and have some jurisdiction, have some decision-making authority. So you factor all those groups together, there isn't a middle ground to be found there.
Which is why we've seen different versions of guns in schools bills over the past few years. And I think the school shooting in Rigby is only going to exemplify what happens moving forward with different political situations. You've got interesting bedfellows, I guess I should say, when it comes to this topic. Always have and probably always will. But for now, this issue is dead for this legislative session.
Yeah, it's not going to move forward this legislative session. And if the two bills we saw make their way into Senate State Affairs, if those bills are any indication, there's not a lot of common ground here. You have the Christensen bill, which would allow any school employee with an enhanced concealed weapons permit to carry. You have the competing bill from the school boards and the school administrators that kind of builds on what we already have. Let's remember what's already in place. School boards, school districts can already allow employees to carry weapons in school, but it's a decision that they have to make at the local level. And some school districts, some charters have already made that decision. They've already decided to have employees carry. And in a lot of cases, what we're talking about here are rural schools where the response time to an active shooter situation would be pretty long. These school administrators, these school trustees want to have some kind of a presence, some sort of a response more quickly in the event of the unthinkable. So you already have that. What the school boards and the school administrators want to do with their bill is sort of build on what's already in place with more of an emphasis on training, coordination with law enforcement. So two very different bills. But again, neither of them are going to go forward this session.
If you're just joining us, talking with Kevin Richard from Idaho Education News, we are making the grade on this Tuesday morning. Kevin, you referenced it. Lawmakers are in recess as we speak. There is no end per se to this legislative session in sight, although there was some talk last week that maybe this would be the last week. They get back to work again tomorrow. Just bring people up to speed on where we are, and have we hit the record? Are we into the longest legislative session of all time for the state of Idaho?
Oh yeah. We broke the record over the weekend. So, congratulations, I guess. This is technically day number 121 of this legislative session. You mentioned it. Lawmakers will be back in Boise on Wednesday. They will reconvene after what's been a 5-6 day recess. It's really hard to tell what to expect when lawmakers come back. The big reason for the recess and the big reason lawmakers wanted to come back this week is they want to have the ability to override a gubernatorial veto if the governor vetoes something that lawmakers are really passionate about getting passed this year. And here I'm thinking your most likely candidate for a veto might be some of these emergency powers bills where you've had the legislative branch and the executive branch not seeing eye to eye about emergency response and emergency powers. I don't imagine we're going to see vetoes on any education legislation. The governor's already signed some of the public school budgets. I don't see much of anything really new happening on the education front when legislators return to town. It's quite possible that legislators return on Wednesday and their work is done fairly quickly. But you don't know. You don't know if lawmakers are going to come back with any last minute legislation that they really want to see push and they really want to pass this session. All bets are off. We've never really quite seen a situation like this. So, tune in Wednesday. We'll see what happens.
Well, and as you said, we haven't seen a session like this. And because of that, there has been such unique legislative backlash is what I'm going to phrase it as. And I mean, even yesterday, State Superintendent Sherry Ibarra and the State Board of Education, for that matter, started their post-legislative tour, which I found a little bit funny considering the fact that they tend to do this every year, and this year it got to be in person again after the pandemic last year made it virtual. But the fact of the matter is the state superintendent even said that this legislative session has tested our patience. So start there, Kevin, and then I want to take you into talking about a really unique survey that came out. And again, this is just a backlash against what has been happening at the State House. People thinking that the legislature is not necessarily hearing the will of the people.
Yeah, I think, the long session tends to translate into short tempers, and I think we're definitely seeing that. Not just at the State House. You mentioned Superintendent Ibarra and the post-legislative roadshow. The survey that came out last week, let's go back to that, because even though the data is a little bit dated now because we're a week out from when the survey was released, still very telling. This was a survey that was done by IACI, the leading business lobby in the state, the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce, and the Idaho Education Association, the teachers union. These are three groups that don't always work together, but they did work together on this public opinion survey. And they surveyed 400 likely Republican primary voters. And 80% of these voters, 80% of these survey respondents identified themselves as conservative. Overwhelmingly saying, let's just get the session done. Let's focus on funding education, transportation, tax relief. Let's focus on the key issues and let's get this session done. That was about a week ago while the session was still going on, but it gives you a sense of some public impatience and some public dissatisfaction with the way this legislature has unfolded. We're looking at it a little bit more closely. We'll have a story that I anticipate we'll publish sometime today, looking at what the governor heard from the public regarding that House Bill 377, that bill we've talked about so often these past couple of weeks, the anti-indoctrination in schools bill that the governor signed into law. What we've done is we've tried to track, well, what kind of input was he getting from the public? What sort of phone calls, what sort of emails was he getting on that piece of legislation before he made the decision to sign it into law? We'll have those results and those numbers. I anticipate that story later today.
Kevin, when we cover the legislature year after year after year, there is always, and you could use the word narrative or rhetoric or language that comes up, and sometimes it gets some play and it pops up, and no matter what the topic is, education, non-education issues. But this legislative session in particular, and you wrote a piece about it for Idaho Ed News, whether you're looking at House members or Senate members, the turn of the tone of the rhetoric was, I think, what really surprised people. And I say the public because I'm going back to those survey results, where the survey results from conservatives told the legislature, just get the job done. Mm-hmm. Don't have so much talk. Don't bring up issues that are non-issues. I mean, that's literally what this survey found, but that's still not what's happening inside the chambers.
No, and one of the narratives that keeps coming up or kept coming up in the education debates was this discussion of indoctrination, this claim that students are being indoctrinated, whether you're talking about the K-12 level or the higher education level, where leftist educators are imparting that kind of that thinking on their students and compelling students to think that way. Translated into discussion of social justice issues, critical race theory, all of these buzzwords, all of these catchphrases. And it really struck me as I listened to the debates over that higher education budget last week, and the very different personal experiences, personal narratives you heard from two lawmakers, Chris Mathias, a Democrat from Boise, the only Black man in the legislature, the first Black male legislator in state history, I believe, talking about his experience as somebody who went to Boise State University on the GI Bill, talking about how it really changed his life, but talking about issues like critical race theory from his personal perspective and why he feels like it's important to be having those conversations and having that dialogue in the classroom. contrast against Senator Stephen Thane, who's the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, a Republican from Emmett, conservative. He said, look, as a conservative male, I can tell you my experience when I went to Boise State and when I was taking a class in the late 70s. I feel like I was, ridiculed for my conservative beliefs. I was given a failing grade on at least one occasion because I espoused opinions contrary to what my professor believed. So you had these two very different narratives from two people who attended Boise State University, I would imagine at different times, different eras perhaps, talking about very different experiences. And is there room in a university system for two people to have very different experiences like this? Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's a big system. Thousands of students are going through at any given time. But really, we've seen a debate this legislative session that has been dictated by narratives because there really isn't a whole lot of hard data to point to in terms of what's happening on the campuses, what's being taught on the campuses, even what's being spent on these programs. You have numbers all over the spectrum. So, it's been a very anecdotal debate, and sometimes anecdotes are powerful. I mean, what we heard from Representative Mathias, what we also heard from Senator Thane, a very personal, very, very, very passionate debate on, two opposite sides of the issue. But those are personal narratives. Those are not, that's not data. And I know the state board has hoped that the next thing that they can do as this debate continues, because it's not going to go away, is to try to get a handle on what's happening. Try to get some numbers, try to get some data, try to get some hard empirical, some facts here. Right now, that's kind of lacking.
We should mention that, and I believe this is true, that Senator Thane did vote for the higher education budget, correct?
Right. I mean, that was the kicker in all of this, was that both Mathias and Thane ultimately wound up voting for the higher education budget for maybe some different reasons. Mathias, what he said at the conclusion of his debate is, we got to do our jobs here. We have to do our due diligence as legislators and fund the university system. So while he is very upset about the way this debate has unfolded, Representative Mathias was urging his colleagues to vote for the budget. Senator Thane voted for it and said, I have faith that our university presidents are going to try to right the ship here. And, ultimately he voted to fund the system.
Speaking of university presidents, University of Idaho President C. Scott Green has been outspoken, honestly, during this legislative session. In fact, all of the presidents, we hear from them during this budgeting process at the legislature, but he has definitely taken a lead role in trying to understand the rhetoric that is going on. And we're looking at an article here that you wrote, Kevin. He had some pretty strong words. Again, I go back to legislative backlash. He had some pretty strong words for what is being said about the university system. Not so much about the money that's being cut, per se, but again, about rhetoric.
Right. And this goes back to April. I mean, President Green sent out a memo to alumni and business leaders urging them to rally in favor of education funding, in favor of higher education funding. That was right after the House voted down the first version of the higher ed budget. So when we had a chance to talk to President Green on Monday, he had a virtual news conference Monday afternoon. He talked about that, and he said, it's a matter of public record where I am about the tone of this legislative session. He said, yeah, it's disappointing. And he hopes that the rhetoric is going to tone down, but he's not very hopeful. What I found really interesting too in that was, we were asking, well, okay, you're losing $500,000. The budget that passed the legislature cuts $500,000 out of the University of Idaho. How much of an impact is that going to have? And he said, really, it's not going to have that much of an impact on students. They're going to take the money out of reserves. They'll cover the loss that way. So he was kind of downplaying the fiscal impact, but the political implications of what's being talked about, what's being said, and how it's being said, that's got him concerned. And I think he's certainly not alone in the education community on that.
You were saying, Kevin, that the State Board of Education their goal now is to try and come up with some hard facts, some data points that they can talk about whether critical race theory is actually being taught, whether we're talking about K-12 or higher education, or what this indoctrination statement looks like. And of course, now that there's some law attached to it, they're going to be tasked with trying to do this. Was there any indication from President Green that the universities are going to look inward as well and try and figure out where some of this rhetoric is coming from and if it's legitimate?
I think that inward looking is probably happening at all of the institutions, but President Green was pretty adamant about it. He's saying, this idea that we're indoctrinating students, it's just not in our character. It's just not in our nature. It's not the way this university operates and the way this university is structured. That we're a pretty independent thinking group here. No, we're not indoctrinating students.
It's a really good article. I would highly encourage people to head to idahoednews.org. Of course, that's where you can get all of these stories in depth, and you can see that survey too that we talked about. I love the link there. Before I let you go, Kevin, let's talk a little bit transition again. Transition. That's what's happening in West Ada right now as Superintendent Rannells is getting set to retire, and the school board has named Dr. Bubb, the Centennial High School principal, as the new superintendent. He takes over July 1st. You had an interesting podcast this past week and got a chance to talk to Superintendent Rannells. Give me some highlights.
I just kind of wanted to get her sense of what's happened this past year. I mean, we've spoken to Mary Ann Rannells over the years. We did a joint interview with her back when she first took the job in West Ada.
Yeah.
46-year veteran of the school system. And I just wanted to get a sense of what has she seen in the school system this year, and how has she sort of processed as an educator the challenges against the political and public backlash. She's had parents who wanted this opening to happen a lot more quickly. She's had legislators pushing for an opening of schools much more quickly than West Ada wound up doing. On the other side of the coin, you had teachers who were concerned about the reopening occurring too quickly. And as you remember, we had a teacher sick out in West Ada back in October. And I really wanted to get a sense of how she kind of processed all of that and how she managed all of that. And I think it's a story of having to make a lot of transitions on the fly. It's a story of trying to do some things in the moment and try to figure out what happened. But there's also a story of kind of reactions at the local level. I mean, here's West Ada, the largest school district in the state with almost 40,000 students. She was talking about one neighborhood school that was really struggling to find substitute teachers, where the parents kind of stepped in and said, well, is there a way we can help? And at the local level, at the micro local level, can parents help fill some of that void? And she was talking about that. I mean, that's a kind of a neighborhood solution to one of the many problems that school districts have been facing during this pandemic. Among other challenges is that, and not just in West Ada, substitute teachers have been very hard to come by.
That's interesting to me, Kev, as we're talking about this, because it goes right back again to the survey that IACI did along with the other two groups. But they specifically wanted to look at if people trusted their local teachers. And in this survey of conservatives, they said yes, for the most part, that again, at the local level, they really have a good feeling about what's happening in their classrooms. So
consistent with other surveys we've seen in the field. I mean, Boise State University does its annual public affairs survey. They put theirs out earlier this year. And what they've seen year after year after year is when you ask people in general, what do you think of the education system? Sometimes the grades are a little bit lukewarm. But when you ask parents, especially parents with kids in the K-12 system, well, what do you think of your local school? Then the results are a lot more favorable. You have a lot more of a positive response when people are asked, well, what do you think of your local school district? What do you think of your neighborhood school?
And maybe Superintendent Rannells, her story about what happened in one neighboring school is just kind of proof of what happens at the local level.
Right. And, again, I would urge you, if you're a West Ada parent, if you're a West Ada staffer, it's an interesting interview. I think she had a lot of, a lot of perspective that she shared about this past year and a sense of where she's going from here after 46 years in the education system.
Oh, I hope on vacation.
That's the plan, but she's kind of put it, she's tried retirement before, and sometimes that hasn't exactly worked. But
yeah, that's true. She took
hoping
this
for
job.
some travel, hoping to.
Yeah, she took this job out of retirement, so that was no retirement.
No, not at all.
Kevin, what do you have coming up? You've got some stories that you're working on. Give us a little preview, would you?
We have quite a bit coming up here in the next couple of days. In addition to the legislature returning, I am going to publish a story either today or tomorrow looking at higher education enrollment. This has been a big project that I've been working on over the past several months. We'll have the spring numbers, and we'll break down the spring numbers and show you what's happened on the campuses. The numbers have dropped off. I'll tell you that much. We'll have the details here in the next. Like I say, we'll have that story either later today or tomorrow, sometime before the legislature gavels back into session. Speaking of the podcast, I am going to be interviewing Governor Little this afternoon for the podcast that will drop on Friday. So you'll get to hear from the governor, get his perspective on what's happened this legislative session and other topics.
Fantastic. Well, we appreciate all the hard work you're doing at Idaho Education News and to the entire team over there. It's been a week. And who knew? Who knew?
A lot that we're trying to pursue, and I should mention other topics on our to-do list. Obviously, following the latest in what's happening in Rigby and the reopening in the wake of the shooting, and our Devin Bodkin, our Eastern Idaho reporter, continues to follow that story as it develops.
Appreciate all of his reporting too. That's really, really good. Kevin, well, I don't know. Do you want to get? You're just not wearing enough ugly ties. I'm saying that the entire legislative process is broken because you have not shown up in your really ugly tie. So
somebody's got to take the blame, right? So okay, yeah, this is pretty conservative tie. That's probably not helpful matters, but they're not in session today, so what difference does it make?
There you go. There you go. Thank you for being here, for making the grade. If you want to see all of these stories, look in depth at the topics we've been talking about, head to idahoednews.org. Of course, at Idaho News 6, we repost tons of their stories all of the time, so you can go to our website as well. Kevin, I hope you have a great day, and maybe next week when we talk, we'll be talking about a legislature that's actually over. Maybe.
I think odds are reasonably good that we'll be talking about the legislature in the past tense.
Sounds good. Have a great day, Kevin. Thanks for being here, for making the grade.